All right. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's Bridge Lunch Break event, Michigan Democrats' first year in the legislative majority. My name is Jacqueline Garrett, Fund Development Associate at Bridge, Michigan, your source for nonprofit, nonpartisan news in Michigan. In this hour, we'll discuss the Michigan legislature's performance this year, the new Democratic majority in the legislature, and the big issues that members are contending with this session and beyond. Today, Bridge, Michigan Capitol reporter Lauren Gibbons will moderate this conversation alongside members of the legislature from both parties discussing 2023's legislative accomplishments and whether the Democratic leadership has acted on 2022 campaign promises. You can read the full bios of our panelists on the event page, and we'll drop a link to that page in the chat for you. Our conversation will begin in just a moment. And Lauren will lead the discussion for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll turn to your questions. Please type any questions you have for our panelists into the chat window at any time. If you are not a panelist, please remain muted throughout today's discussion, we request. Please keep all comments and questions in the chat respectful and relevant. We are recording today's conversation, and it will be posted on Bridge, Michigan this week. You can subscribe to our Politics Watch newsletter by visiting www.bridgemi.com and click subscribe. Events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge members. If you'd like to join this membership community, we will drop a link to do so in the chat. Please stay muted throughout the conversation again. I'll now pass it over to Lauren to get this event started.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everybody. As Jackie mentioned, I'm Lauren Gibbons, Capitol reporter with Bridge, and really looking forward to today's discussion. Obviously, a lot has been happening in the Capitol in the last few weeks, especially, but all year. And it has been a pretty significant shift in this year as opposed to previous years with a new Democratic majority for the first time in many years. So today, joined by Senator Michael Weber, Senator Sarah Anthony, Representative Andrew Beeler, and we should be joined in a little bit by Representative Aiyash as well. And so I just wanted to start today and just kind of do a sort of quick round robin with all of you, grading the legislators' performance, overall. Are you happy with what's been accomplished so far? And we can start with Senator Anthony.
All good. Lauren, thank you just for giving me the opportunity to be on the panel today. I know Senator Weber and Rep. Beeler really well, having served with both of them. So this is exciting. And we're going to all tease Floor Leader Aiyash when he comes in late. We're going to make him very embarrassed. In terms of the letter grade, I'm going to say an A. And that's super awkward for me. Normally, especially women, we usually kind of downgrade our performance and how we show up in workspaces. But the feedback I have received from people in my community and across the state is that we are actually delivering on the promises that we made that allowed the Democrats to have the majority. Things like gun reform laws, reproductive health care, the final touches on financial disclosure. I have to brag as the appropriations chair, a historic budget, $80 billion that's investing in every corner of our state. So I think the only thing that would prevent us from being an A+ is that, honestly, after 40 years of not having a Democrat in this space, process, learning curve, we've got more to do, but I would give us an A.
Sure. Representative Beeler, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having me on this panel. It's always great to be invited to anything that Senator Anthony's invited to, and Senator Mike Weber. It's a pleasure to finally say that I've served with you as well. I know he's got a reputation as being a very effective legislator when he was in the House, and it's great to have him in the Senate now. Unfortunately, I disagree with Senator Anthony on her evaluation. I think the letter grade for the legislature thus far has to be incomplete. We took 2 full months off in the summer. We're about to take 2 more months off. And I think when you talk to real citizens in Michigan and they're asking questions about rising prices, why are taxes so high? Why is my energy bill so high? And then why is the legislature taking 2 months off at the end of the year, giving ourselves a 4-month vacation? My goodness. I really think that we're getting an incomplete. But if you're going to pin me down and give it a letter grade, just for sake of comparison, unfortunately, I have to give it an F. It's bad policy and it's bad governance. We've seen in just the very limited time that we've been in session thus far this session, repealing of the freedom that workers in Michigan used to enjoy, breaking the bank. $82 billion budget. If you judge budgets by the size of them, then sure, that's a great budget. Unfortunately, I think it's extremely fiscally irresponsible. We're now banning natural gas as of about 6 hours ago, thanks to the House. We're banning natural gas in Michigan. And we tried our very best to deny Michiganders the tax cut they earned, thanks in large part to the work of Republican in the House and the Senate. That'll be realized this year. And then I also just think it's bad governance, right? The committee process in the House is in absolute shambles. Last night, literally last minute amendments to bills where even the majority party doesn't know what we're voting on. And then the very basics, we still have failed to do our constitutional duty to implement Proposal 1. I hear every single day in the House about the will of the voters in 2022. So the will of the voters overwhelmingly passed Proposal 1, and none of us have taken action to implement it. And here we are talking about taking a 2-month vacation. So it's very frustrating, I think, for me to see all of the issues facing our state, and to see us rushing to get out of Lansing simply to achieve some sort of a partisan political agenda. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to disagree with the senator and give us an F this year.
Sure. And how about Senator Weber?
Well, I really should have gone before Rep. Beeler because I was also going to use the incomplete comment. But I think it's been interesting. I know we're going to talk about like minority, majority, and this and that. But the reason why I would say incomplete is maybe a little bit different in that I just, my experience in the House. Obviously, we had some partisan votes from time to time, of course, but I think in this case, every major initiative other than the budget in the Senate and this financial disclosure piece in the Senate has been fairly partisan so far. Obviously, we've had a lot of votes when you look back where we have broad support on kind of some smaller bills here and there. But every kind of major initiative, when you talk about the energy policy that just got passed, obviously right to work, some of the other packages the first few months in terms of repealing items, it's been more partisan instead of doing a work group, working together, having like bipartisan bill packages and then having broad support in the caucuses, in each caucus to get it done. I hold out hope that we can do that. We can still get there as we turn over into 2024. And I think there's room to do that, particularly in the Senate, because a lot of us have worked together and came up from the House together and have, I have a great relationship with Senator Anthony. We worked together on some bill packages when we were in the House together. And so it's not personal issues. I mean, I've known Senator Singh since I was in college, and so there's some good relationships across the aisle, but it's just, how can we get together on, some of these bill packages? I think the other thing I would say in the Senate is there is some hope for some bipartisanship on these bills, but I think they need to be developed in a bipartisan way in order to really get bipartisan support at the end. And I think at least that's how I tried to operate when I was in the House on the stuff that I personally worked on. And I think I hold out hope that there's ways to do that going forward. So.
And Senator Anthony, I wanted to ask you about the pace of the Democratic-led legislature. Obviously, in the first several months of this year, a slew of legislation, a lot of Democratic priorities passed. The budget got done. Now we're looking at another round of a lot of different policies happening at the same time, in the last couple of weeks and moving ahead into next week as well. And can you talk a little bit about, the Democrat strategy and why you felt it was important to get a lot of things out of the way pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that we have been going very fast right? That's not to say we haven't been deliberate. To Senator Weber's point, I spent a lot of time on the state budget and making sure that when it made it to the finish line, that it was a bipartisan budget, because we don't have Democratic roads and Republican schools. I mean, this is one state, and some pieces just cannot be done by one party. We all have really great ideas that we bring to the table, but there's been a lot of pent up pieces of legislation that have never seen the light of day. I'll give you a personal example: child marriage. Something that, because of this Democratic majority, we were able to finally end. It's something I introduced in 2018. And, year after year in Republican-led legislatures just didn't see the light of day. Now, under this administration and with the House and the Senate under Democratic control, in the first 6 months, we were able to quickly get that done, because it's something that we have been fighting for year after year after year. So the same is true with pieces like expanding the earned income tax credit or repealing the retirement tax. These are things that we don't have to have a work group or workshop for 6 or 9 months. We know the solution, and people expected us to do these things immediately. And when folks look at Congress, they see inefficiency. They see folks who are workshopping for years and years, and people in our communities who, are either from low income backgrounds, who are just trying to make sure that they can make ends meet every single day. They don't have time for us to sit on our hands and be ineffective. So I'm excited about the pace that we've been able to accomplish so much for people. And I don't see us, letting off the gas anytime soon. And hopefully with things as simple as like the earned income tax credit and the retirement tax, we actually can receive bipartisan support. And I think Representative Beeler mentioned that there could be a potential that we may have to leave early. That hasn't been decided yet. But if that was the case, it would be because, unfortunately, our Republican friends in the Senate were not giving these really common sense pieces immediate effect. And so in order for taxpayers to see that type of immediate relief, we would have to leave early. These are some of the things that, when we look at the power of bipartisanship, we need to be working together in order to see real relief for people. And it's one of the biggest disappointments, I think, that we've seen in this year. So I don't think we're going to slow down. You've been covering this, Lauren. You know that. We're not slowing down.
Sure. And Representative, I'll give you a chance to respond to that a little bit, but also wanted to kind of get the Republican side of the perspective. As this pace has been going through, the Republican caucuses in both chambers have disagreed on a lot of these policies. Can you talk about how it's been for Republicans newly in the minority in the legislature, as a lot of these Democratic priorities go through?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, just to respond, I think it's great to hear that that immediate relief is the priority. It didn't seem like that was the priority of legislative Democrats maybe 9 months ago. If it were, we would have granted the tax cuts retroactivity. They would have been effective this year. If tax relief were a genuine priority, then we would have not had to fight and ultimately have a Republican win over securing the income tax cut that every Michigander earned. And so it feels a little disingenuous to say that immediate relief is really the reason we need to leave early. I would be hard pressed to believe that leaving early has anything to do with anything besides the presidential primary, but I'll leave that for others to address. Regarding the pace, I think it's feeling a little reckless, if you ask me. I think Senator Weber mentioned the idea that we ought to be deliberate, and we ought to be deliberative in these bodies. People expect us to debate. People expect us to bring different ideas to the table. And when every key piece of legislation that's come through, at least the House, has been a partisan vote, can you really expect that folks were brought to the table and a deliberative process was delivered on some of these wins? So I think that the pace is very much forced. Again, we took 2 months off in the summer. Why? Not sure. We're about to take 2 more months off and call it quits early for the legislative session this year. Why are we rushing through these pieces of legislation? Why are we introducing amendments to bills in the 11th hour just to ram it through on a party line vote? That feels reckless. This process is supposed to be slow. And I know that, boy, democracy is pesky. It sometimes gets in the way. And, for the party that talks all about defending democracy, it doesn't seem like that they appreciate the deliberative nature that it's supposed to have. This is supposed to be a slow process. We don't want the government acting quickly, intentionally. That's kind of the basic American principle. And so I think that for me, seeing a government run quickly is not a good sign. It's usually a bad sign. And I think in the last 9 months, it's been a bad thing for Michigan.
And Senator Weber, quickly, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of expected it to be kind of a robust pace early on. I think as MERS would say in a lot of their articles, a lot of the things the first few months, even though there was a lot of stuff that was done, it was kind of the low-hanging fruit stuff that all 56 House Democrats and 20 Senate Democrats could agree on. Obviously things have slowed down a little bit now as we get into other parts of the agenda, but the when you look at the election last year, certainly it did bring in the Democrat trifecta, but it also had very narrow majorities in both the House and Senate. It wasn't necessarily like a mandate to get these things done. And so I look at it as, are we trying to address the concerns that we're hearing in our districts versus doing pent up, bills? For instance, looking at nursing ratios when we have a nursing shortage right now. I mean, stuff like that. And these are things that have been bottled up in past Republican legislatures, but is now the right time to do that when we have nursing shortages and hospitals and people like that could be penalized for not meeting those ratios, and so stuff like that. But again, and I think too, this is certainly a roadmap, I think, for, the tide will turn someday again, and there will be Republican majorities in the House and Senate. So it's a great roadmap on how to repeal bills that we don't like and do it at a quick pace. That's for sure. So.
Sure. And Senator Anthony, what would you categorize among all of these different issues that Democrats have taken up this year? What would you categorize as the biggest accomplishment, if you can pick?
Well, that budget sure was great. Beeler, it was great.
Said by the Senate Appropriations Chair, for the record.
It's true. Listen, I walk into my office in the Capitol every day, and no one on the walls that has done this job looks like me. And a part of that is a reminder that in the first 6 months when we were building this budget, a part of what I asked all of our colleagues to do on the Republican and Democratic side is go back to your community and listen to your people. We wanted to elevate the voices of Michigan families in every part of that budget. So you see one of the biggest issues that we've heard in every corner of the state, whether you're in a rural area, urban, suburban, is housing. We made substantial investment in housing. Water infrastructure. Michigan, in many ways, in the last decade, has been known for a water crisis. When we think about what happened to the folks of Flint, Benton Harbor, and yet we doubled down on our investment for water quality, whether we're talking about Mackinac Island or Highland Park. We made sure to invest there. Downtowns that have been overlooked for years in Republican majorities, places like Pontiac and Lansing and Saginaw are now seeing revitalization literally within those areas. And we did so, despite what a narrative would say, with a fiscally responsible lens. We will be prepared when there is a turn. And we all know in the next few years, we won't have federal COVID dollars that we can reinvest in our communities. So we did so with a fiscally responsible lens. We put money away in our budget stabilization fund. So I'm really excited about that budget. I'm excited that it feels as though, and this is not just my feelings, we have heard from residents across the state that they can see the state budget working on their behalf. And if folks can't see it with all these barrels that we're navigating, trying to fix all these roads, or they can't see it in the way that we expanded Reconnect to many more people by lowering the age to 21, so that regardless of your walk in life, you can go get an associate's degree for free in the state of Michigan. There's so many pieces in that budget that regardless of your party or where your standing is in life, you should see yourself reflected in that budget. And I'm just really excited about it. I'm proud of that. So that would be my personal biggest accomplishment, and something I think regardless if you're an R or a D or somewhere between, we should be proud as well.
And for the Republicans on our panel, I guess we'll start with you, Senator Weber. Can you talk about were there any instances? I know you mentioned that it's a priority for you to try and get some bipartisan victories here. Were there any instances that you can recall where that worked? Were there any particular bipartisan wins that you can think of over the last several months?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I think for me personally, in the minority in a targeted seat, I think for me personally, it was working with, Chair Anthony on the budget and some of the items that made it back into the 9th State Senate District, including $10 million for a sound wall along I-75 with the I-75 expansion. But I will say, particularly on the Senate side, there was a lot of bipartisan work, on that budget. I know Senator Bumstead's our lead on that, working with Senator Anthony. And I think you did see broad support for both of the budgets. Obviously, this was a one-time opportunity with the $9 billion in ARPA funds that were left to really kind of make some like one-time investments. And I'm certainly not the expert on the budget the way the chairwoman is, but I think, we did an adequate job at doing that. And now we shift towards, not having those dollars, but still obviously plenty of dollars, to put into a good budget for next year and going forward. In terms of other things, sometimes there's just these, what I would call smaller bills that don't necessarily get a lot of media attention, but there's been a lot of things, I serve on 3 committees that are relatively bipartisan, committees. And in each of those, I can think of instances where we, worked with the chair or the sponsor to make, the bill a little bit better. Obviously, then it got broader support, it got immediate effect, and was able to happen. And so I think my role in terms of a minority caucus member is to, try to provide some of those ideas. And I think if they're reasonable, obviously they're taken up and adopted. So.
Sure. And Representative, I guess from the House Republicans' perspective, were there any areas where you were able to come to agreements with House Democrats?
I'm glad you came to me last. I need a little extra time to think about this one. I think if you're asking for bipartisan wins, I think we had a couple highway naming bills that did quite well. It's troubling and difficult just to think of some. You think of things that generally have bipartisan support. Oh, I'm glad to be joined by my colleague, Floor Leader Aiyash. I've been covering down on the House update thus far. I don't think you disagree with much of what I've said. So I'll just keep going. But I think when you look at some areas where there may have been bipartisan support and Republicans came to the table to try to address an issue that's been presented, Democrats couldn't get it across the finish line. The land value tax is a great case in point. Just a few weeks ago, there's a proposal brought to us by Democrats, by a Democrat city, by a Democrat mayor. And there were Republicans who supported it on the merits of the bill. I was not one of them, but hey, if this is a solution to the problem that the majority of the members think will work, great. Couldn't get it done. Public safety, just last night, everybody wants more funding for our law enforcement officers and for safer communities. But because the Democrats could not get out of their own way, and because there are serious factions of, unfortunately, at least in the House, the caucus that disagrees with giving police officers funding to enforce the law, couldn't get it done. So truly, it is really hard for me to think of an actual bipartisan win outside of, like I said, those highway naming bills.
And I want to turn to Representative Aiyash, who has joined us. Thanks so much for being on the panel. A few minutes ago, I gave everyone the opportunity to kind of grade the legislature's performance in this past year, the first in a long time with the Democratic majority legislature. And so I figured I would circle it back and give you the opportunity to talk about, how your perspective on how the legislature has done this year.
Thank you for having me. Andrew, it's good to see you. Always predictable, but very, very great to be able to work with you in Lansing. So look, I think that we have had an opportunity this year to advance a lot of generational issues for our state. And there have been a lot of ways that we have shown an attempt to work with both Republicans and Democrats, because when you look at the issues that House Democrats and Senate Democrats have actually addressed, they are the things that everybody, regardless whether you want to identify with an R or a D, uh, it directly impacts and benefits your life. You look at things like the earned income tax credit. You look at things like the pension tax repeal. You look at what we just did last night. For the first time ever, the Michigan Public Service Commission actually has to take into account affordability when we're looking at IRPs from the utilities. So we are doing the things that will actually put more money in people's pockets. We're investing in things that are truly transformational for people's lives, expanding things like Michigan Reconnect, making sure that we're investing the highest per pupil spend in state history. These are all accomplishments that I think folks will look back at, not in 20 years, not in 50 years, but really in the next 2 to 3 years and say, this is a legitimate transformational impact for my life. And it was the result of this productive session that we've had. And we're just getting started, right? We have 13 more months to do this incredible work before the 103rd legislature. And we are very excited about what's ahead. So I know my colleague reduced bipartisanship to highway naming bills, but I just want to talk about a very critical piece of legislation that passed 110-0 that really shows when we decide to focus on the things that matter, there are opportunities for us to change lives. The legislation that allows criminal penalties for those who seduce those who may have a developmental disability to send sexually explicit material, right? That is something that I think both Democrats and Republicans had an opportunity to say, that's something that's exploitative, it is cruel, it is disgusting, and you should be held accountable if you are choosing to seduce someone or coerce someone to posting things of themselves that they otherwise would not consciously be aware of doing is wrong because you decided to be someone that was vile and had ill motive. So that's an example of legislation that we just passed this month that had 110-0. It was one of the few rare moments where we had a unanimous vote in the Michigan House. And that is something that I think so many of us will look back on and be proud of. And that's just one example of some of that work.
And one thing that I really am interested to hear from all of you on, especially with this, it's such a close split on the majority and minority caucuses here, which means there's a lot of conversations within the caucus about how to get to 56 on certain priorities, but also just from the Republican side as well. There's just a lot of differences of opinion, even among members of a specific party, depending on whether someone's more progressive or more conservative or a little bit more in the middle. So I guess we can start if Senator Anthony, if you'd like to start here. How have you and other members of your caucus navigated the wide variety of viewpoints in a very tight majority here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we're in our caucus room and there's 20 folks who ran on the Democratic platform, there's 20 different perspectives. There's 20 different districts that folks represent. And I have learned so much from within my caucus. There is nothing like a person from Macomb County. Let's just be honest, Republican, Democrat, something is different about Macomb County, right? So getting to know people like Senator Hertel and Senator Kleinfeld and the unique situations that their residents face as it relates to roads and poverty and educational outcomes is very different than the perspectives of my colleague, Senator McDonald Rivet, who represents both Midland and Saginaw. So I believe that diversity is really our strength. And if you have a willing heart to listen and to learn and to think beyond our own unique perspectives, I think that it makes for richer conversation and robust dialogue. The other piece I will say is everyone, due to redistricting, is coming in with districts that are very unique. And we're learning more and we're stretching our understanding about different communities and different issues. For example, I came from a district that solely represented the city of Lansing and Lansing Township, very urban, very progressive community. I now represent the majority of Ingham County and all of Eaton, which has a substantial rural population. So when I'm voting on things related to gun legislation or reproductive health care, it is a strength for me to be able to go within my own caucus and in the Republican caucus to learn and grow in my knowledge base about issues that I am just honestly trying to understand from a different viewpoint. So the diversity really is a strength. And I think that at least in the Senate and hopefully in the House as well, that dialogue is making for better policy. In which, yeah, not everyone's going to be 100% happy, but if we're looking to be productive in this legislature, I think the compromise comes from really authentic conversations. So I've really, really enjoyed working within our caucuses. It's enriched my life, not just made me a better lawmaker.
And Representative Aiyash, could you talk about how that's played out among House Democrats? I mean, I know you have had a few late nights recently, kind of working towards that 56 majority margin on some of these key priorities. So would love to hear from your perspective on how the House Democrats have dealt with this.
Yeah, I mean, if you just if we're objective for a moment and look at the areas in which the House Democrats represent, is the most diverse terrain in terms of demographics, socioeconomics, and lived experience. So when you're bringing in 56 people into a room, the conversations are going to be very, very robust and very passionate. I mean, everyone believes that they were elected by their constituencies to deliver on the things that they ran on. And then the delicate balance becomes, how do you make sure that people's concerns are sort of put together and brought into consideration? I always kind of think of it like a game of Jenga, right? You almost have to know which block you pull out and which block you keep intact to ensure that the structure is upright. And I think in this case, the structure are the concerns and the issues of the working people of our state. I'll give you a clear example of what we were able to do just in the last couple of days with the Clean Energy and Jobs Act. There were legitimate questions about whether or not we could figure out a way to responsibly balance making sure that local units of government and communities had a stronger input in being able to lay out Michigan's clean energy future in terms of solar and wind projects, while also making sure that the process was not going to be too convoluted and too confusing that it breaks apart the discussion point of having a serious, significant state impact in terms of guaranteeing that our state can responsibly source and obtain power and energy for our communities. So we were able to have robust discussions with our members and really listen to the folks. I don't represent townships. I don't come from a community that has rural background, but I was able to talk to the many Democrats that did and stakeholders around this issue. And we were able to find a strike point where we would allow local governments by not by choice, but now as a standard practice to take the first bite at the apple in terms of citing renewable projects across the state. And then if there's not an ability to figure it out, let's say it is a conversation where this is a project that spans multiple townships, it may not be one local unit of government, but you're looking at several, then the state could then be able to work this process through to be able to make sure that we are securing Michigan's energy independence. So that's just one example of what we can do when we are putting in the work to try to take into account all the considerations. I'll say that I have visited every part of the state since I have been in the legislature, including the thumb, despite one of my colleagues who brought up last night. And that is a result of seriously taking into account the the perspectives and the lived experiences of our colleagues and their communities. Whether you're looking at places like Kalkaska County, you're looking at places like Marquette, Benton Harbor, Port Huron, all of these places have people that genuinely just want the best for their families and their community. And you cannot assume there's ill intent or there's just an obstructionist mindset when there are people that say, hey, I really want to make the best policy forward. Here's where I can get that going. And, at the end of the day, right, it's not compromise, but it's really finding a way to collaborate. And, the root of collaboration comes from this concept of all of us have to figure out what is our best foot forward to be able to move whatever we're trying to move forward down the finish line. And I think we've been pretty successful. I always say government moves like honey, but it's not as sweet. It's just very slow. And sometimes you sort of watch it move and you're waiting for the outcome. And eventually every bee pollinates. So.
And Representative Beeler and Senator Weber, how has that played out for your caucuses on the other side, determining which priorities, people might be able to have a few different opinions on, maybe some of your members cross over and vote with Democrats or, coming together and kind of voting with the united voice, if you will, on some of these issues, how has that played out for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got a good caucus. Obviously, we've got the same challenges, whether it's majority or minority, in terms of different personalities, different thought processes, and this and that. Again, coming from a tighter seat, a targeted seat. Obviously, I've got to vote my district, and I try to do that as much as I can. Obviously, at some times, and Senator Leader Nesbitt has done a great job of keeping us together. But sometimes if some of the processes, maybe not the best as it's been here and there the last couple of weeks, he really pushes us to kind of stay united, and I think that's a strategy, within the minority that you have to have. I was even just talking to Majority Floor Leader Singh, and of course he was the Dem House leader back in 2017, 2018. So I think he knows exactly what Senator Nesbitt's going through and what some of the strategies that Senator Nesbitt and his team implement in terms of trying to I think push and force the majority to make sure that they get their votes on their side before we help them get some of this stuff done. And again, hopefully going forward, we have more bipartisan packages, more bipartisan stuff that we could do together. Obviously, that's the way I like to operate, and I think that there's some ways to do that.
And go ahead, Representative. Yes.
I would just say from the House's perspective, we, with 54 members, where we won in areas of the state that we've never won in before, the downriver area, two years ago, 2 cycles ago, the Bay City area, Genesee County, for goodness sake, we certainly have a diversity of opinions, and different things are different or are important to different folks. Certain people have promises that they made during their campaign to respond to their community. No doubt about it. So the diversity of opinion within our caucus is absolutely there, and that's to be expected. But I think what we've learned over the last 9 months is really what's uniting us is much, much stronger and much larger than kind of the nuances on the edges of policy. So when we're talking about tax cuts for families and small businesses, when we're talking about the freedom of workers to associate with a union or not, those are the key issues that have been unifying to our caucus, and I think speak to how we'll govern when we're in majority. That's what's important to us, is the kitchen table issues. Transparency is another one that comes to mind. My goodness, this is something that we have been chomping at the bit at in amongst the House Republicans to have a conversation about this, to build bipartisan support if that's what it takes, and have thus far not had success in doing that. But I think we've learned a lot in the last 9 months about where we're united, and I think the resounding conclusion is that we're tremendously united. And there are really creative ways that I think Leader Hall has done to find where those overlap. despite representing the Rochester Hills area and the Keweenaw Peninsula, right? It doesn't get much more diverse than that. And so I think that we're really proving that thus far this term, and I think we'll just continue to prove it as we get closer to 24.
Sure. And I want to switch over to some of our reader questions. We've been getting a lot in. I appreciate everybody paying attention and following along and offering some good questions here. So I'll start with one from Carl, who asked this of Senator Anthony, but Representative Aiyash, feel free to weigh in as well, about whether you feel that the Democrats have handled majority control in ways that are different from the way Republicans operated.
That's a good question. Hi, Carl. Having served in both the minority, so I served as state rep for Lansing for the first 4 years, and so this is my first year in the majority party. Things seem to be a little bit different, right? I've built a reputation for being a consensus builder. I'm not a bomb thrower. I tend to be a technician, someone who sees a human first before I see their party. But everything in this building, I'm in the Capitol now, everything in this system is designed to divide us, whether it's the seating chart or just the issues that in many ways our constituency, or rather our parties, expect us to promote, that tend to be wedge issues. That's what our donors want us to focus on. That's what the parties want us to do. But when we kind of strip away, again, all of that and focus on what our community wants us to focus on, I think we don't lose our way. What I have seen in this Democratic majority is a strong intentionality to lift up issues that have been overlooked for decades. I mean, something as simple as expanding Elliott Larson to make sure we have protections for everyone, including folks in the LGBTQ plus community. That is not a partisan issue. I have lesbian friends who are Republicans. I have gay friends who are Democrats. It doesn't matter. They shouldn't be denied housing and employment opportunities because of who they love. And yet, again, because this Democratic majority has lifted up those voices and created platforms in a way that I think our Republican colleagues for decades just weren't willing to do, that is a sea change in the Capitol. There's no denying it. If that was the case, many of these things, even the Crown Act that bans hair discrimination, these things would have seen the light of day. So instead of just prioritizing corporations and businesses and lining the pockets of very well-connected people, this Democratic majority has made a decision to uplift the voices of people who haven't had a voice in this place. And that's a difference. It's a stark difference.
Representative Aiyash, feel free to jump in too.
I'll use the latest bill that we just passed last night as an example of where someone who's worked in Lansing for over 20 years came to me and said, this is a novel concept that we have not a novel concept, but this is a process that we've seen you implement or go through that we have not seen in a long time. And I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't think it was just a radical idea. We brought everybody into the room on the issue that had a vested interest, and we made them hash it out, 60 people through a facilitated discussion. And I said, well, why is this such a weird thing to do? Is, well, normally they talk to us in separate chunks, and then they tell us what they think is best based on what we all say. And I'm like, really? I think the easiest way to figure this out is to make everybody come in and they share their perspectives, and then as legislators, we make the determination of what should and shouldn't be weighed in terms of the merits of the policy. So I think there's something to be said that if folks who have been in this institution for so long or around this institution for so long made note that there was a difference in how this process works, I think there's something to be said about there is a shift, right? And I also think it's who's in the room when these discussions are happening that has been radically different. We are being very intentional. I like to use the concept that I've worked on called co-governance. This is something that I workshopped before I got into the legislature, and it's now something that I implement into my work now. where those that are directly impacted by the policy should be closest to the policy making. And it is shocking to me when you talk to people and they say, we've never been brought into a conversation on this particular issue, or we've actually never had someone come to us. You look at our water affordability language that we just introduced with Senator Chang. For the first time ever, we're going to make sure that water in the state of Michigan is not something that makes you go bankrupt or makes you lose your home, but it's something that you can afford on the basis of your income, because water should be a birthright here in the state of Michigan. So just hearing the conversations from people, from advocates, from community members that say, we have never had a moment prior to this majority where we can actually walk in, have our concerns heard, and then that actually be implemented through an amendment or through a public act that the governor signed into law. And that is a refreshing thing to hear. And it's inspiring, right? It sort of motivates you to keep that process going to make government better. There are a lot of things that we are still trying to slowly unwind in terms of the points that Senator Anthony mentioned. The designed partisanship. I always joke with my colleague Rep. Beeler. I come to his side of the aisle more than he's ever came to my side of the aisle, both in majority and in minority. So I always make the effort to cross the street, so to speak, the proverbial street, and I usually go banter with him and have conversations. And look, I hope one day before the end of the term, if he's inspired to do so, him and I can work on legislation together to sort of show folks that it's not all rigid partisanship, but when you choose to emphasize the concerns of Michiganders, we can find a way to do that, because not every single thing is rooted in party line opposition, right? There are good ideas that if you actually went to people and on the merits of the policy, tell them, hey, what do you think of this? We can negotiate the process in which those ideas are implemented. That's fine. That is the point of the sausage making. And in my case, it'd be a non-pork sausage, but that is the process, right? You can make that happen if you are willing to come to the table and say, these are the strike points that matter to me. Can we find a way to get that done? And I know that when people see all the partisanship that plays out in the press and on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, you definitely get jaded, but I still believe in this institution. And I think my caucus is doing what we can to make it better.
We've got just about 12 minutes left, so a little over 10 minutes. We've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to try to, if we can try to run through them kind of quick here, that would be great. Appreciate our panelists considering them. So I'm seeing a few questions about financial disclosure. Rex is asking if lawmakers could talk about their positions on those bills. And then another commenter, that's more of a comment as opposed to a question about the transparency bills. But that's a topic that's come up in the last couple of weeks here. If anyone wants to weigh in on their thoughts on the financial disclosure bills.
Yeah,
I'll take the first bite. All right,
yeah,
Mike.
Go for it.
All right, thank you. Well, Andrew calls me Honest Abe, so I figured I should talk about transparency and ethics. I think the state legislature should implement the most robust policies possible. You all deserve to know what is influencing our decisions, if any, and you should be able to have the receipts, so to speak, to be able to keep us in check and make sure that we are working on behalf of the state and not lining our own pockets. So I for one, would always support any opportunity to advance stronger ethics and transparency in the state of Michigan. We are now constitutionally mandated to do this, so I want to thank the voters for making that possible. But I want to be clear that this is going to be something that we will continue to build on over the next couple of years to make sure that Michigan will be a leader in terms of transparency. I know journalists love FOIA, and we are going to clean that process up. So there are many opportunities that I think we are definitely going to work on to make it possible for folks to be proud and have trust in their government.
And Senator, go
Yeah.
ahead. I saw you wanted
Yeah,
to
no,
jump in.
I think a lot of what the floor leader said, was good. In the Senate, obviously, this is one of the issues I referenced earlier. This and the budget have been two of the bigger items that it seems like we've built some pretty good consensus among the Senate, but with broad bipartisan support. I think our vote was 36-2, I believe, and with all four of the bills that passed, and it's a bipartisan package with Senator McBroom and Senator Huizenga from our caucus. Is it perfect? No. I mean, it's very much a compromise. It's very much looking at what was in proposal one. And then, I think the main pieces were, the financial, disclosure, obviously, income outside of being a legislator, and that kind of thing. Obviously, we already have campaign finance, disclosure in terms of our campaign donations for our committees and stuff like that. And then, to the floor leader's point, there is a FOIA package, and I know Senator Anthony and I have voted on that previously in the House, and usually the bottleneck was the previous Senate. But you have a lot of House members bipartisanly, former House members are in the Senate that have voted yes on that package before, and so I think we're hopefully not going to be one of only two states left that doesn't have some sort of FOIA for legislators and this and that. So I think there's a lot of stuff we can do, but this is a step in the right direction, and I'm hoping it gets done in the next week. Obviously, for those watching, if it doesn't, then I think, assuming if we go sine die a little bit early, it reverts to a judge and a court to kind of figure it out. And I think we would prefer to handle it in-house if we can. So.
Sure. And we're getting also a lot of questions about energy policy. One commenter questioned about how much land area would be required for solar panels, any studies that have been done to determine if there's enough renewable energies in Michigan that they would actually work. And then there's a couple other energy changes made to the House energy package. Lots of energy questions. So if anyone wants to weigh in specifically on energy policy.
Yeah, I would just jump in. I know Rep. Aiyash wants to probably speak on this too, but we're short on time, so I got to get my punches in when I can. But I'll let you know what changes ended up in the energy package once I've had a chance to read them, and despite having voted on them yesterday. So that was certainly a frustration that I'm not going to let go, because it is important for people to know that things are being introduced last minute. And your representatives, your voice, don't have a chance to read them. That's important to know. It just is. I mentioned in my floor speech, you could fill up the city of Detroit twice and still not have enough energy to generate the electricity for homes and schools and businesses in the state. The idea that we are going to intentionally rely on unreliable forms of energy in the state is, and then we're going to lie to people about how it's going to be less expensive, is insulting. And I think that this package is going to be something that we look back in 5 to 10 years and say, we are going to need to make a change here. I was having a conversation with someone last night. I think this will be our new auto no fault, where this becomes the #1 issue with the state, where we are the biggest outlier in the country, expensive energy. And this will be the job of future Republican majorities in the House and the Senate and in the governor's office to fix. Because this was feel-good legislation that will not work, that will not help the environment. So that's what I would say about energy policy. I'm not that passionate about it, as you can tell, and I just think it's disappointing to see the way that was run through the House this morning.
And yeah, go ahead, Representative. It looked like you were ready to respond.
Yeah, I just I'd encourage my colleague Rep. Beeler to take boxing lessons for better punches. But if we just talk about the facts, I think when you look at what we actually rolled out, study after study have shown us that no more than 4% of the entire land in the state of Michigan would be required to meet all of our power needs in the state of Michigan. And if you actually look at prime farmland, and prime farmland is identified as land that is critical for growing crops that we need for our sustenance, you're looking at 0.3% of total prime farmland that would be required to use to be used to make us reach our clean energy goals. I want to be clear about something. Folks think we're going to flip a switch and all of a sudden we're going to have all of this deployment of solar and wind overnight. This is technology that keeps getting better, and this technology that takes time to actually implement and build out. It is not something that they're not Legos that you put up and then in a matter of minutes, but it actually takes a lot of thoughtful planning, a lot of considerations on examining the land that you use. And first, before any of that, it requires a private property owner to enter into an agreement with a developer to even lease their property. And then there are all these safety requirements, there's all these environmental requirements, there are all these technical specifications that have to be met in order to lay this out. So we set a plan that we voted out of the House and the Senate voted out last week to help us meet our goals in a responsible way. And the way we can get there is going to be through large-scale wind and solar projects. And the technology behind storage of the energy generated through wind and solar has improved tremendously and will continue to improve tremendously. There are Republican states that see the benefits. Places like West Virginia have much faster permitting processes and much quicker and state-focused permitting processes than places like Michigan that we just passed. So we did everything we can to strike that balance of appreciating the concerns of our local communities while meeting the responsibility of finding a reliable, independent, and affordable energy supply for the state of Michigan. And the way we are laying this out with our goals in 2040 is a responsible and thought out way that we leaned on experts for. And we are going to be moving forward, I think, as a state, we're going to look back to this and say this was the generational moment for Michigan. I think my colleague is right. Voters are going to look at this issue, and it will be one of the defining aspects of what motivates voters to recognize we helped create high-paying union wage jobs to be able to roll out all of this energy that we need. And we're building a Michigan that will be energy independent. We no longer have to import. 100% of our coal that we use in Michigan is imported. Over 90% of our natural gas and petroleum products that we use are imported. All of this can be weaned off with the programs that we are going to be implementing. And it'll be a thing that will create jobs. It's going to be a way to actually reduce costs and build a stable grid for our state for decades to come.
This will not reduce costs. Wind and solar are 30% effective. This plan is going to cost $200 billion based on a report that was released this week. The idea that it's going to reduce costs, if you believe that, you're being taken for a ride, and you have to set the record straight on that. It's completely false.
We are running short on time. I do want to get to one more question from Steve, who is asking what the legislature is doing to ensure children's safety in the aftermath of the Oxford shooting. I don't know, Senator Anthony, you haven't spoken in a while. Is that something you'd be willing to take on?
I was just listening to the boys just go at it. So that's the thing. Last week, a 2-year-old shot themselves in a car in Lansing. I think took it from a glove compartment. And in this Democratic majority, we've taken the first major steps to curb gun violence. The first major steps. When we talk about the power of immediate effect, these few gun reform bills are not able to be in effect right now because we were not able to get immediate effect. So outside of the policies related to taxes and all of those pieces, these types of things we are trying to get through in this first year of a Democratic majority, but they are not able to be unlocked because of the lack of bipartisan support. Whether it is financial disclosure, whether it is these tax relief pieces, gun violence, all of these pieces cannot be, we did a little bit to address, right? But we're just addressing, we're not solving these problems yet. It's going to take time. We have all of these ideas, and while we have back and forth and banter and late nights and we squabble around some of the details, people are literally being killed in our classrooms, in grocery stores, and in cars. And so I hope that we can get to a place in this next few weeks or in the next year that we start to look at not only the mass shootings across the country, but in tragedies in every part of our community and all across our state to actually start to do things. We haven't gotten there yet. And every moment that we are shy about it, that we listen to the most extreme elements of our parties, more people will die. I'm a responsible gun owner. I do believe in the right to carry. I believe there's also limits to all of our rights. And so it's one of the failures that I just believe we haven't gotten right yet. It's a national issue. It's a national crisis. It's not all related to mental health. Every other country on the planet has the same types of people and yet do not have the amount of murders, mass murders at the hands of guns. And so I'm really passionate about this. It's something that has been such a missed opportunity in this first year. So we got to get it right next year. And we need partners on the other side of the aisle to do just that, because it's not a partisan issue. So, Steve, I wish I could report more. I wish I could tell you that we have 25 new bills, new restrictions, new thoughtful policies, not to take away guns, right, from those of us who are responsible, but to actually save kids' lives. We haven't done that. And the blood is on our hands for not having the courage to do just that.
Well, I think on that note, we are just about at the end of our lunch break here. Once again, I just want to thank all of our lawmakers who joined us today. I really appreciate your insight and being willing to talk about such a wide variety of issues in this amount of time we had today. Really appreciate it, and appreciate being willing to have a bipartisan panel as well. That's always helpful for us and helpful for the public as we try to parse out these issues. And then I will turn it over to Amber or Jackie to kind of close us out here.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to all of you for participating today. This was a fantastic discussion. I learned a lot, and I think we all did. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Lauren and Jackie for leading today's discussion and hosting us. Thank you so much to Representative Aiyash, Senator Anthony, Representative Beeler, and Senator Weber for being our special guests today and for having such a thoughtful conversation with us. We appreciate you. Just a reminder that we were recording today's discussion, so we'll be posting that recording on our website, www.bridgemi.com. So if you want to watch again or you want to share that recording on your social media channels, we'd be delighted. So please feel free to do so. That should be up on our website either this afternoon or early next week. This was our last lunch break event of the year, so we'll look forward to seeing you in January. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, everybody.